So welcome to another Fpwebinar. These are our short to the point webinar series where you guys pick the subject matter. Feel free to take a look at any of our past webinars online. You can share those out with your friends if you think they might help. At the end of this, one lucky attendee will win a copy of Microsoft Office Professional 2013. All you have to do to win is just be present throughout the entire webinar. Myself, I'm Chris Schwab. I'm the president of Fpweb. I'm going to kind of go through and introduce this just a little bit. So how we choose these topics is we send out kind of some questionnaires, things of that nature. We talk to people at conferences, and we try to get their input on what they want us to talk about. And what we've got is that people want to know more about kind of the difference between a service like what we provide in Office 365. So from there, we kind of started talking about what that content was. And since we work primarily on our side in the private cloud area, we wanted to make sure that we had some pretty good subject matter for you for Office 365. To do that, we felt like we needed to bring in somebody that had worked extensively on both platforms. So to do that, we reached out to our partner network, and we talked to a gentleman named Malcolm Eaton, who I'm going to introduce here in just a second. And he was able to kind of jump in, put some content together for us, and really kind of dig into what's going on between these two platforms. The goal here is to really just educate you so that you can choose the right one. So before I get any further, I'm just going to welcome our guest presenter today, Malcolm Eaton. Malcolm, why don't you take it from here?
Hello. Thank you very much, Chris. We are excited today to talk to you guys about sort of the differences between a private cloud scenario and a public cloud scenario like Office 365. One of the things we're going to hit on today, in a short 20-25 period time frame, are just some of the limitations that you have with Office 365 and with the differences between a public cloud and a private cloud. One of the things that we want to talk about is that collaboration has truly evolved. Even in the last year or 2 years, I think people really want to be able to see and view their data anytime, anywhere, and that includes working on different devices. And one of the things that has been great about the cloud is it's helped to support sort of that new way to collaborate, that new way to sort of work together as a team, and that's been key. One of the assumptions that we want to make about this crowd and about the people who are on the phone today is that you've made that decision to move into the cloud, or you're really thinking about making that decision and moving into the cloud and looking at the differences between a public cloud scenario and a private cloud scenario. You understand that the cloud brings benefits like 24/7 support, professionally managed data centers, things like highly available infrastructures that you can work from, network security, intrusion detection. These are all very, very key things as you're kind of knowing the need to make that move to the cloud and not having to support that type of infrastructure on your own. And that also helps you to be able to scale out and to meet various capacity demands that your business is demanding today. The challenging part that you have is that there's a lot of different flavors. There's a lot of different scenarios out there when it comes to making this cloud decision. And one of the things that we hope to tackle today is really helping you to make that decision, helping you to kind of understand what the differences are. We're going to talk a lot today about just different abilities around customization, around security, around compliance. And like Chris said, we're going to be able to take questions at the end. So if there are things that we missed or there are things that are concerning you, please feel free to ask questions through the Fpwebinar tag. One of the things that's going to be important here is that as you are looking to make that decision of moving to the cloud, how are you going to get users to jump on board? How are you going to get users to adopt and come on with you there? And then how is that going to align with your business? And so one of the challenges as somebody who's making this decision, whether it's a CIO, a team lead, a project lead, how do you balance those end user requests, all of those needs that the end users want with compliance, with legal, with the governance that you're going to have around it? You need to weigh both those costs and flexibility. And what we hope to do today is give you some of those measurements to weigh some of those costs and flexibility. So one of the first things we need to do is sort of set a foundation, kind of talk about a foundation between what is a public cloud scenario like Office 365 and software as a service, and then how does that sort of ramp between platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. By understanding these foundations a little bit, it helps to understand sort of the limitations within each environment. So when we talk about software as a service, that's targeted really towards end users. When you're looking at platform as a service, you have sort of a hybrid between some of the software as a service concepts and the infrastructure as a service concepts, which is great for application developers and designers. And then as we're working from an infrastructure as a service, that's really where the network architects and that network infrastructure piece plays. Office 365 can be thought of as software as a service. What Office 365 does is it offers that standardized platform for people to work from. And this gives you SLAs both at the hardware level and at the software level. But now the challenging part with that is that you get minimal customizations. And so to be able to have those economies of scale in a public cloud environment, the customization level is just not there yet. One of the things you'll hear me say multiple times today is just the app development model within Office 365 is just not mature enough yet to do a lot of complex types of things, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail today as well. With the software as a service model, that's going to give you both the hardware infrastructure and the software infrastructure is going to be provided for you. And so that helps to not have to maintain that, not having to maintain updates, not having to maintain hardware or hardware patches as well. That's all going to be handled through Office 365 through a public cloud scenario. Platform as a service, that's kind of a nice hybrid between the two, infrastructure as a service and software as a service. And companies like Fpweb, where you're utilizing SharePoint and some of that software that's installed on some of your service, but the whole infrastructure places there, serves sort of as a platform for as a service. This gives you access to some of the application services and development models. All of those same infrastructure service level agreements will be there for you. From a software perspective, you're going to have a little bit more control over that software, but it also depends upon who you choose as a private cloud provider. Both the software and the hardware can be provided in the platform as a service, and that's going to give you some customization, but not the same level of customization that you're going to have when you're utilizing infrastructure as a service. And so some of the other private cloud models will allow you to just virtualize your hardware, and then you're going to bring the software, you're going to have the customization of the software that you want to use completely customized to your needs. In this model, what you have is your information delivered as metered services. That means you're paying per usage, per bandwidth that you're working with those devices. Now, here's the bonus. You get complete application control, complete customization, so you can build the type of model that you need that works well for you. I like this chart. This comes from a TechNet article about infrastructure as a service, where it goes through sort of the 3 different topics that we talked about, and then at a very high level, it shows sort of the structure around the different cases. When you're talking about Office 365 and software as a service, we talked about that customization is minimal, and then in the middle, we talked about platform as a service, sort of having that greater customization, but you're not going to get sort of the full customization you get with infrastructure as a service. Now, each of these matters because what happens is they serve as sort of that model between the public versus the private cloud scenarios. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between a public cloud and a private cloud. So in that public cloud model, in that software as a service model, we're talking about the infrastructure being shared by multiple customers. And what we said before is that as it's shared by multiple customers, that's going to give you limited customizations. It's important to understand what some of those customizations limitations are, and we'll talk about those as well, so you can say, are these things I need? Are these things I can live without? Now, the nice thing about a public cloud scenario, about an Office 365 scenario, is that this is managed by Microsoft. This is managed by that third party for customers. So you're not worrying about patches. You're not worrying about hardware updates. In a private cloud scenario, you're going to have much more control over that environment. The infrastructure is going to be maintained just for you. It's going to be the infrastructure that you need to work to perform the tasks, to perform the jobs that you want. And this goes back to that full customization capabilities. Now you can build any sort of application that you want to work with the private cloud scenario. Now, this is generally going to be managed by yourself. If you're building an application, you're going to have to manage that application. But then there's certain aspects of, let's say, SharePoint that can be managed by that private cloud vendor or a third-party provider. I also like this. This is another chart that is really nice. It sort of talks about that classic build versus buy scenario. You know, can you buy the things that you need? Is what's out there good enough for what you're trying to do? And you look at that left area there when we're talking about sort of that partner-hosted. Oops, let me go back there for just a second. You talk about that partner-hosted private cloud, and again that dedicated environment. You see it over there. You're building the things that you're needing, but you're internally designing and being able to kind of still get the benefits of the hosting. And in the Office 365, it's more of a buy scenario where, you know what, the pieces that are out there are good enough for what we're trying to build. This is a nice slide too. It sort of talks about how you have operations, you have IT is sort of fulfilling that one infrastructure level. They come in, and if they have to work in maintaining that infrastructure on the operations side, they can help there. But then management can help on the platform software as a service level, and that helps you to provide the different types of services and solutions that are key for your company. And now what's nice here is that you can tell the more you go up that food chain, the less people you need involved to sort of support that information to get to where you need to be. Now, to get there, what do you need to do? What are the steps that you need to take before understanding those limitations? You really need to understand evolving requirements. Everybody's requirements change. Every client we've worked at, you come in, the requirements will change just in the 2 weeks that you're there with them. You need to really understand those evolving requirements. And then what's essential? I mean, a lot of times you're doing things that you want to do. What's essential that you really need to work with? And how do you mitigate risks? Do you understand the roles, the rights, all the governance around what you're trying to do? Because once you do that, it'll help you to balance the business needs with what the service can provide. So once we identify those requirements, you have to map them to SharePoint functionality. You have to understand, okay, here's my Office 365 functionality. Here's my private cloud functionality. What's important? And then you have to step back and make the difficult decisions. One of the things that I would get caught up in myself is I'm always like, oh, I want this, I want that, and I want this, and I want that. And sometimes people just have to reel me back in, and they're like, nope, that's not essential. That's not critical to what you need to do. And those are sometimes difficult decisions for your team to hear, for the end users to hear, but it helps to kind of get that balance, and it helps to ensure ongoing operations management, the ability to continue to maintain and sort of grow whichever environment that you're in. Now, once you understand some of those things, going through and kind of detailing out some of the limitations that you see in an Office 365 environment, balancing that with some of the private cloud scenarios that you can work with is essential. This is a very nice sort of high-level graph that sort of talks about total cost of ownership. And so when you look at this and you see the good, better, best at the bottom there, in a traditional environment, you're managing the hardware. You're managing the software. In a private cloud environment, it's going to be more of a hybrid. You're managing some of the software aspects of it and none of the hardware aspects of it. In a public cloud, you have the entire hardware and software is being provided for you, so there's no cost associations that are going to be with that to keep adding new servers or new software. Don't get tricked by the time to new solution for the new apps. What they mean there are apps that are already pre-built for that environment. So Office 365 has their app store. And if you have something that works with that app store, that's fantastic. You can go out and buy that, and you can put that solution out there quickly. In a private cloud scenario, there may be some additional configurations that need to be done. In a traditional environment, you might have to configure the server as well as configuring some of the software. So you see sort of that good, better, best there. Now, where it does start to get tricky is when you build existing apps, and we're going to talk about this a little more in just a second. But in a public cloud scenario, depending upon the type of app you need, it can be very complex to roll out, or it can be very simple to roll out. So that's why you see sort of that gray area there in the time to solution. One of the nice things, though, is that if your application needs to scale, in a public cloud, in Office 365, it will scale with you. The servers will scale. You know, Microsoft even released it. They're allowing site collections going up to 1 terabyte now. And so that is the ability to really grow with that. In a private cloud scenario, the infrastructure will scale very easily with you, but then depending upon any of the custom software that you've built or any of the software that's necessary, you'll need to sort of scale that on your own. Now, I know a key thing for a lot of people on the phone here is compliance. Is my legal group? Where is my data located? You can have full control over that in a private cloud scenario or in a traditional scenario, but in a public cloud scenario, you do not get that level of control. And so I know that's a concern for a lot of people as they try to make the decision between Office 365, a public cloud, or a private cloud scenario. One of the things that you're going to see is that there's a lot of limitations within SharePoint Online. These are just some high-level limitations. There's a great TechNet article that lists out all the differences between the different flavors of Office 365, as well as some of the limitations between the on-premise or the private cloud on-premise scenario or the public scenario. Some key ones that we've seen, some key ones that we've had to fight as we work with our clients is incoming email to lists and libraries. One of the nicest things about SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2013, we're able to enable this and then really simplifying the process of tracking information like in an issue tracking list. Timer jobs for launching reminder notifications, they're not available in Office 365. And don't get me wrong, there's ways to sort of circumvent and work around these, but they're just not available naturally within there. A lot of the basic charting web parts were removed from Office 365, and so you have to sort of figure out solutions for charting. And we'll talk a little bit more about full trust code solutions as well in just a minute. And a lot of the advanced tools, don't get me wrong, we just went to the SharePoint conference, and they were pushing Office 365 very much. And one of the things they said is that tools like Performance Point and Advanced BI, they're starting to build those pieces in. They're not there yet. But one of the things that you have to do is sort of balance, keep an eye on Office 365. It's growing constantly. It's really sort of changing every day. But right now, a lot of those tools aren't available for you. One of the things that I love about SharePoint, and ever since I started using it in 2003, is that there's been such a great marketplace. We've partnered with a lot of different vendors, such as Bamboo Solutions, Metalogix, and they have these amazing third-party products, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. One of the biggest challenges right now with Office 365 is very few of those third-party providers have made that launch, have made that leap into Office 365, and so a lot of those tools just don't work yet. Companies like Nintex have worked very hard to start getting some of their tools ready for Office 365 and integrated with it, but once again, that app model is just not mature enough. And so as you're working with customizing some of those apps and building some of those apps, one of the things we've seen is that custom code that we've built, some of the complex applications that we've built do not work in Office 365. And as our company has tried to make that move into the Office 365 app model, one of the things that we've seen and we still see right now is that building a custom application in the new model is taking us 2 times as long, 3 times as long, even 4 times as long because their resources aren't out there, the tools aren't out there. We're having to do something that is so simple in the old method that takes a lot more time in the new method. Our team is constantly working to kind of figure out how to work through that, but for a lot of our clients, it just doesn't work, and so they've had to move to that private cloud model to allow them to build line of business applications that then integrate with their back end. And so that's something that's really important to think about is what types of applications do you need to build? What type of applications do you need to work with? Search is another big piece. As you're working with search, whether it's in a private cloud scenario or public cloud, understanding that if you can have the information in one location, it's going to be easier to work with. But then as you're building tools to search multiple locations, once again, you're building or you're integrating apps or pieces that in a private cloud scenario will work to go back to your line of business, to go back to your applications and pull that information back. It's going to be harder to do some of those things in Office 365. But once again, Microsoft is making a lot of strides in that area to try to simplify that and to try to bring in more of those line of business applications that you're working with. We talked about regulatory considerations, compliance considerations. One of the things that's very tough is that legal does not like having their information out on other people's servers. And so what sort of compliance needs do you have? One of the things that we heard at the conference was Microsoft is working really hard to be certified in HIPAA, certified in different compliance areas so they can be part of that. They're not there yet with some of them, and so understanding where they are and how they're trying to get to that model is very important. I know one of the pieces is understanding where your data is, and so we talk about, if it's sensitive data, where is it located? In a private cloud scenario, you can dictate where that is. You'll know exactly where those servers are located, and so that's important as you're working through it. Same with search and discovery. If you need to be able to get at that information or archive that information or need it for 7 years, you need to make sure that whether it's in a public cloud Office 365 scenario or a private cloud scenario, how are you going to get at that information? How are you going to work with that? So one of the things that was really interesting for us is we ran into a situation where we had this whole application built, and we were all excited about this solution we had pitched to a client. And that solution was critical that we were able to do an auditing feature that's built into SharePoint. And so you see there, I've got sort of circled the opening or downloading document viewing items, one little checkbox. We went in and we said, yep, we can do this. And they said, well, we're going to be in Office 365. Can we do it? And we're like, yeah, you can do that. And then we went back to check, and they had removed that feature. So this was a feature that was available in Office 365 that they took out because it was crushing their servers. And it makes sense. If everybody has this on, you can see how disk space and how processor usage can get crushed. But this changed the entire game for us for one of our clients. And so as you're going through and as you're looking at balancing a private cloud versus a public cloud scenario, you need to understand your requirements like we talked about, and then understand the limitations that are being driven by that, by Office 365 or a private cloud scenario. So when you talk about managing Office 365, when you talk about sort of working with it, what are the administrative controls? Central admin's gone. So in Office 365, you're not going to see central admin. What you will see, though, is you will see the Office 365 admin tools. So a lot of that control, a lot of those pieces are not there, and you can see that in that TechNet article as well. But one of the key things is that a lot of our development team, a lot of our infrastructure team are using PowerShell to automate processes to help fix issues. But you see here, I love this chart because it shows that, you know, in 2010 they had a ton of commandlets. In 2013 they had it even more. Online Office 365, it's just now growing, just starting to figure out kind of what can be added. Now, once again, this is one of those things that changes often, so I had to check the numbers before I did this presentation to make sure they didn't change over the last couple of weeks. But this is still some of the same numbers that you see here. We talked about a lot of things today, and we still haven't talked about everything. One of the things that you need to consider is what are the software licenses that you have? What's your current licensing model? What kind of support do you need as you're going through there? One thing that Office 365 is really good at is their social strategy. And there is a huge vision that Microsoft is having integrating Yammer into their social strategy. This comes built into Office 365 now. With SharePoint and Service Pack 1, a lot of these tools are coming in there and are being built in. Microsoft is telling us that all of the social stuff is going to happen first in Office 365 and then get ported to SharePoint. So it's important to sort of understand sort of that difference between the two. And then as you're maintaining both hardware and maintenance, what do you need to do from a private cloud scenario? Is the infrastructure support system that you have strong enough, whether it's around the software or the hardware or the understanding of your private cloud, public cloud scenario? So what are your personnel skills around there? We talked a lot today about sort of security, compliance, governance, understanding your role there. What are the pieces that you're doing? How can you work within there? That's going to be important. Even though your information's in the cloud, you can't forget about disaster recovery. What if you can't access your information? What if you lose information that's on the cloud? How are you going to be able to get that back? What is their sort of recovery process for getting that? So still understanding those things is going to be key. And one of the other challenging pieces that we have not talked about today is the upgrades and migration. In Office 365, the default behavior is that you're going to get the new updates pushed down to you. There is the ability to go in and maintain and sort of manage that process better, but you have to be ahead of the curve. And what makes that so hard is that if you're building a custom application and you're trying to stay ahead of that curve and Microsoft pushes down a change on you, there's nothing, you have to be testing, you have to be ready for it. So there's a lot more sort of upkeep around managing applications in Office 365. So it's really important to sort of understand that as you walk through it. All right, so we've given you a lot of information. So Malcolm, which one do I choose? Which one works for me? Well, of course, there's no silver bullet. One of the things that we've seen is that smaller companies, less than 1,000 people, who don't have really complex application needs, work well in a public cloud scenario. But larger companies with really strict compliance and governance and regulatory considerations, integrating line of business applications, trying to quickly roll up applications, they need to go to more of a private cloud scenario. Now, as the app model grows within Office 365, we see that there might be a shift there. But over the last year or 2 years, it's just not there yet. But every day it's getting closer as you're working through it. So I want to thank everybody. We got right in within 25 minutes here. I want to thank you guys for all coming in and spending time with us this morning. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was what you're looking for. I'm going to ask Chris if there were any questions during our little presentation.
Thanks, Malcolm. Really appreciate kind of the deeper dive. We've talked about some of this stuff on the surface before in some of our other webinars. It was really helpful to get some more sort of specific and in-depth information about what's going on. So we appreciate that. We do have a couple questions. I can probably handle both of those. The first one, we sort of use the terms Office 365 and SharePoint Online exchangeably sometimes. And somebody asked, are they really the same thing? Well, Office 365 is kind of the suite of products, and SharePoint Online is the specific product within the suite. And Malcolm, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that or not, but a lot of times we throw around both those terms kind of interchangeably. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's key there is that it really was, a lot of what we're talking about today was really had to do with SharePoint Online and sort of the comparison between SharePoint Online in a private cloud and a public cloud scenario. And Office 365, don't forget, also includes Exchange and Link and SharePoint. So there's a lot of different components within there. And now Yammer is also part of Office 365. So Chris, you're right. It's sort of a huge family of products.
And what we see a lot of times, in dealing with just one part of that suite is, those other products don't have a lot of these limitations because they're not as kind of customizable. And it's, kind of specifically the SharePoint Online where we run into some of these customization limitations. So.
Yeah, a lot of times people, when they move to Office 365, Exchange and Outlook are great, because, hey, I just need to get my mail, and there's not too many things I need to do, so that works well. But what we've seen in the SharePoint world is that people are using applications and building processes and workflows and integrating other pieces and reporting, and so you need more customization when it comes to that.
So somebody else asked about the TechNet articles. We've shared those in the chat. We'll be tweeting those out later just so you guys have the direct links for those. Another question we had here is, are we going to discuss any prices? Malcolm, what have you kind of seen on the pricing of the Office 365 and private cloud kind of stuff?
So within Office 365, Microsoft has a pretty set sort of pricing that they have around the different models, and so there's a good article on that. What's interesting about the private cloud scenario is it really varies depending upon what you're trying to do. We have companies that are in a private cloud scenario, and your spend is just not going to be as high as even in a public cloud scenario because you have more maintenance and you're managing by servers rather than sometimes by end users. And so it really has varied. And Chris, maybe you can talk a little bit more towards the Fpweb pricing, but it's been varied for us.
Yeah, generally when you're talking about private cloud, you're more talking about you're deploying. The focus is kind of more on the server itself. So it's more about how many resources do you need to support a group of users. Where in a multi-tenant or in a Office 365 scenario, you mentioned a couple times where they'll limit features that are really sort of blowing up server resources. They do that so they can break that model down into more of a per user kind of a thing. So they have a pretty good idea of the performance that each user is going to kind of chew up. But in a private cloud, it's much more, the customizational properties are a lot more extensive. So we don't always know. I've seen 100 users be able to, really utilize a massive server farm, and I've seen, thousands of users be fine on a very minimal build because they're just not doing that much. So that's the private cloud is generally sort of priced per server resources.
Yeah, and
sorry, go ahead.
No, I've seen the same thing as well. And so one of the things is that, Chris, I wanted to quickly put up online here you can see sort of the pricing model for the Office 365 pieces. And so if you look on, you can just, I did a quick Google search on Office 365 pricing, you can sort of see that model there as well, but just wanted to throw that up there. And the other quick note I wanted to put out is that all of the TechNet references will be in the slide deck in the notes section, and we're going to post that on SlideShare shortly after the presentation today.
Just want to take a minute, too, to announce our winner while we're kind of going through some questions here. Mike Brannon is the winner for our Microsoft Office Professional 2013. We'll send you that information about kind of how to get that just after the webinar is over here. I've got another question here. Just wanted some more information for the commandlets that you mentioned. Can you dive into that for us just a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the things is that there's a really good article that talks about the differences between the different commandlets available for PowerShell. So PowerShell has a list of commands that can be used, and so those commandlets there's a ton of them that can be utilized when you have that environment, when you have that control. Now, one of the things that Microsoft has to do is they can't let you run commands that can affect the server, that can get underneath the sheets. So they have to give you a very small subset of what those commands are within there. And I'm going to pull up one of those articles right now. So that's going to be really key there, is that you have to understand what you need from PowerShell. And this a lot of times the advanced users will see some of those will need some of those controls as you work through there. And this was just a good article, so let me pull up that real quick. And like I said, this is going to be in the slide deck as well, and so you'll see that as you work through there.
Malcolm, while you're kind of going through that, another question we had here is, can you talk a little bit more about SSRS support and some alternatives there?
So one of the things that we're working with from a SQL Server reporting services area is that Azure is a nice sort of complement to Office 365, and so if you're running in a public cloud scenario, one of the things that we've seen is some of our clients are making that move to Azure, and then they're able to utilize SQL Server and SQL Server reporting services. Right now, the connections back to on-prem SQL servers is just not there. It's not as strong from a reporting services standpoint. But in a private cloud scenario, of course, you can work with SQL Server, you can work with your SharePoint instance, and so you're not going to have some of those limitations. But right now, Azure is an answer for SQL Server, and then sort of still building from the other pieces that they're working with to get those other connections.
Just kind of going down the list, we do have quite a few questions here, so we're going to try to get through all of them if we can. So what about limitations on sandbox solutions? Have you run into any any limitations there? Because sandbox solutions is something we can utilize both in Office 365 and kind of in a private cloud. Is there limitations around that from an Office 365 standpoint?
So one of the things that we've seen is that the sandbox concept. So when Microsoft first released Office 365, they had this whole idea of having these sandbox solutions, and then what happens, they started to veer away from that concept because they wanted you to move towards the app model in developing some of the solutions that you're working for. And so what we've seen is that a lot of those solutions that you build now have to be pushed towards that app model. The sandbox is it's not supported the way it was in Office 365 initially. Only site collections can utilize it.
Okay, so next one I'll go ahead and take. In a private cloud scenario, will SQL Server be dedicated? And it's the answer is it can be. The nice thing when we start moving into the private cloud scenario is that everything can be sort of custom based on their needs. Generally, just talking for us specifically, we will virtualize SQL and we'll try to keep the storage dedicated, just so we have a little bit more control over the resources of it. But it depends on your budget, depends on your needs. We will kind of deploy whatever is needed based upon what what the customers are actually using this for, or what the employees are using it for, which is again sort of highlighting the difference between these two scenarios. Not saying one's right, one's wrong, but one is, you know, a kind of more of a custom solution. One's more sort of an out of the box. Here's what you have with it. So.
Yeah. And Chris, I was able to pull up on screen sort of that commandlets article that we were talking about, and so the article that we referenced here is really talks about the different commandlets for PowerShell, and you can see online there's the 27 or so commandlets that you can be used for PowerShell, but then you see in a 2013 environment there's the list sort of commandlets that you can use. So it's a huge difference between what can be used obviously in a SharePoint Online environment and then a SharePoint private cloud environment.
No, that's perfect. We have one more question here. They're asking, is Office 365 true SaaS kind of browser only, or do you have applications on your local device?
So the way Office 365 works is that depending upon the license model that you get, what Microsoft will allow you to do is they will allow you to download their Office product suite. And so Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, what you can do is you will download a local version of that software to your machine. Now SharePoint obviously runs in the cloud. SharePoint, your Exchange server, all those things will be running in the cloud. But so you are getting applications on your machine. Now you're not building applications on your own client machine. In the app model, you're building them on the server, and they'll be housed on your SharePoint Office 365 environment. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. That pretty much wraps up at least you know, the questions that we have here. If you have questions after the fact, you know, feel free to kind of tweet them to us, and we can track down the answers. You know, we'll be sending these slides out and the recording to everyone that attends. We'll also be posting that up on our site, tweeting that out as well. If you have anybody else that you think you know, might benefit from this, feel free to share this out. And there will be a survey at the end of this too. We do take that, you know, pretty seriously. We are always looking for different topics to talk on or bring in our partners to kind of talk about. So fill out that survey. Let us know what else you want to hear about, and we'll do the work. We'll kind of track down everybody, and we'll get you a presentation sort of put together. And then finally, I just like to thank Malcolm. You know, this was really helpful to kind of have a little bit of a deeper dive into one of these, and I really appreciate it, Malcolm.
Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciated kind of disseminating the information today. It was a fun time.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.